Ecosystem stability. From a simple tree to a vast Arctic landscape, ecosystems can be found everywhere. These ecosystems are shaped by how organisms interact with each other. Mutualism. Mutualism is an ecological relationship between different species in which both organisms involved receive mutual benefit from their interactions. Mutualism influences biodiversity because it allows for multiple species to coexist within an environment. One example of mutualism is the relationship between pollinators and flowers. They use nutrients from plants while also spreading pollen, which allows for plants to reproduce. Pollinators are very important to the stability of the ecosystem because they allow for producers to populate while also being a source of food for some consumers. A decline in pollinator population would result in an unstable ecosystem with dying consumer populations and producer populations. Predation. Predation is the relationship in which one animal eats another for energy. Predation helps maintain ecosystem stability by moving energy through the energy cycle. This ensures that every animal has enough energy to survive, which they pass to each other as they get eaten or die. If a top predator is removed, the secondary consumer population will increase. This will put a strain on prey and producer populations, who will not be able to provide enough energy for the secondary consumers. Prey and producers will eventually die out, leaving no food for the secondary consumers and causing them to die out too. Top predators are keystone organisms in an ecosystem, so removing them will have dire effects. One example of this is the wiping out of wolves from Yellowstone National Park, which resulted in a devastated ecosystem. Competition. Competition refers to the relationship between two organisms who are fighting for resources. It influences biodiversity and ecosystem stability because it manages population sizes. Without any competition, there would be no coexistence between organisms or species. One species will use all the resources, causing the other species to die. This decreases biodiversity as it hinders the coexistence of multiple species. One example of competition is when two plants compete for space in order to get more light from the sun and more room to grow. One strategy that is used to minimize competition is resource partitioning. This can occur between two or more species if they evolve to use different resources, land, and times to eat. This minimizes competition and helps species to coexist without competing for the same resources. One example of this occurs with the annelid lizards, who evolved to live in different habitats to avoid direct competition. Commensalism. Commensalism is the ecological relationship in which one organism benefits from the interaction while the other one is unaffected. One example of a commensalistic interaction occurs between the cattle egrets and the cattle. The birds eat the insects stirred up by the cattle while they are grazing. This benefits the birds by providing them a source of food, but it doesn't affect the cattle. Commensalism encourages biodiversity by allowing multiple species to coexist and survive in an ecosystem. Parasitism is a symbiotic relationship in which one organism benefits while the other one is harmed. The species who is being harmed isn't intentionally killed by the parasite because the parasite needs to feed off of its nutrients. One example of a parasite is a tick, which feeds on a cat's blood. While the cat doesn't die from this interaction, it will have irritating skin. Parasitism affects biodiversity by influencing host populations. Organisms often die after hosting parasites, which causes a decrease in parasite populations as well. This causes a fluctuation in host populations, thus affecting the stability of an ecosystem. Real-world example, coral reefs. Mutualism. One example of this relationship occurs between clownfish and sea anemones. Clownfish live in sea anemones for protection. They help sea anemones by luring prey. This maintains biodiversity because it allows for two species to coexist and benefit from each other. Parasitism. This relationship occurs frequently in coral reefs. This can be seen with the interactions between fish and isopods, which attach to the skin and gills of fish. This affects the stability of the ecosystem by preventing overpopulation in host populations. Commensalism. This relationship can be seen when observing the interactions between imperial shrimp and large sea cucumbers. The shrimps use the cucumbers for transportation, which doesn't harm or benefit the cucumbers. Commensalism reduces competition for survival and promotes biodiversity and coexistence within the ecosystem. And here are some references.